Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this today's committee of the whole meeting. The town of Hinton respectfully acknowledges that it is located on the First Peoples traditional lands. We recognize this traditional territory to show respect and understanding to those who walk this land since time immemorial. Today, we uphold our ongoing responsibility to work together in the spirit of the intent of the treaties with all the First Peoples and nations that call this place home. The town expresses gratitude for the opportunity to build a better community on these sacred lands for generations to come. With that, I'd like to call today's meeting to order. To council, are there any changes to the agenda? Councilor Taylor?
Ask for a question on the agenda.
Sure.
I got a paper copy of the agenda on Friday, and then there was a modified agenda that came out, but I couldn't find any changes to the agenda. What was changed on the agenda? Because I concentrated on the copy I got on Friday.
Administration?
Through the chair, I will refer that to Charlotte. You're aware of what was included in the updated version?
Not sure, I wasn't here. I can double check.
Through the chair, I'll pass out to this chair.
Thank you, CEO can ask it through the chair of the rest of the committee and speculate, because we didn't cover the two. But the RFD for the FCSS level of service was altered to remove the organizational chart, and the organizational chart also was removed, I believe, after the first publication.
Okay, so that color chart was, that's all the change.
I'll just check. Please.
That's sure. Oh,
Sorry, just give me a moment to scroll down to it. There were three attachments to the FCSS level of service policy RFD. One was a policy itself. One was a colored chart of the current programming, and the third attachment was the organizational chart. That was removed from the agenda, and then the agenda was republished. And I believe that's that can tell you a change.
okay, thank you.
Okay, council, any other changes? Any changes? None from council, administration, are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes from administration.
Thank you. I'm looking for a motion then. Michaels?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda for August 8th as presented.
Mayor Michaels, council, if we could vote electronically, if we could see the motion, please.
Did I, was supposed to get H programs. Oh, I did something.
And that's carried unanimously, thank you. That brings us to citizens minute with council. Any citizens who'd like to address council today? See none. Online, I believe. Okay, we'll move on to delegations and presentations. We have none today. And that brings us to reports from administration, 5.1, Town of Hinton Library Level Service Workshop.
Thank you, Chair. I will refer this to Mr.
Thank you, CEO Classic, and through the chair to the rest of the committee. I won't add much to this report before you, as most of the council was at the workshop, as well as the board. Just note of clarification, the library level of service and the reserve policies are intended to be library board policies, adopted by the board, not one of the town of Hinton service level policies, even though the service branch is again the community services department. And that's why it's branded the way it is, you see in the attachments. An issue that did arise at the workshop, that talking about surplus operating budget transfers to reserves in 2022 primarily, but also partly in 2021. And this report is bringing that matter forward for discussion for you. And with that, I'll take any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Duke. Maybe is there any questions? In favor?
I'd like to put forward a recommended action if I could.
Yeah.
Or I'd like to put forward a recommended action. Just that I agree with that. And I think that when we actually signed that contract, that section 3 and part 6 of the contract, it says that we can put surplus into reserves, the library can put surplus into reserves, that we all assume that that would be within reasonable limits, not large amounts of money like this, or at least those amounts of money that were put into reserves would be talked to us or discussed with us. So I think it's a reasonable recommendation. And in particular, if you look at the 14-year history of the reserves of the library, we worked on reserves of 32, 43, 18, 18,000 from 2011 to 2014, 2015, it got up to 160. It was only in the COVID years with the salary surpluses that the surpluses started getting up to $400,000. So LOAs and surpluses related to salaries have ballooned in that particular period of time. So the surpluses and the reserves are up pretty high. Nice.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Councilor Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't disagree with this. In fact, as a member of the board, we had in-depth conversation over the reserves and discussed the options that were available to us, which one of them was or looking at and returning some of the money. I guess my first question, though, because we have a meeting in August scheduled, this recommendation, was it in conjunction discussed at all with the library manager at all, or was this just
Well, thank you for the question, and the answer is no. This matter is coming before the committee for discussion, and there's been no communication of that nature to the library manager.
okay? No, and with that, I mean, if this does, if consensus is built on this, I mean, then it helps the board also to make a decision. But I know that this was actually some of the conversation that we were having, that we weren't giving all back, but giving a portion of it back was part of that conversation. And then that's in fact in August, looking already at the budget to start having these discussions. So I'll be in favor of this. I think that it's we need to get off this cycle for sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ross. Councilor Henry.
I do have a question, I guess. So they provided this policy for reserves, and that's their policy, the one that they presented here. So this minimum of $300,000 of operational reserve is a number that's being put forward from the library board.
To administration.
Thank you through the chair to the rest of the committee. This policy that you're seeing today was the same one that was tabled on the day of the workshop. I know that they're developing this a little bit further. I can't speak to any minimums that I haven't been at the last couple of meetings, so I don't know where they're at with this policy.
Through the chair, just to build on that a little bit, but to second part of the question, it is the library board's responsibility to make those policies for themselves, have this that legal entity. Our control as a municipality, we are ingrained with the library boards and other elements, but the main responsibility we have is making funding decisions on them per year. But they do have those controls to make those policies to decide on what services they're going to provide. But the decision for funding and the requisitions that they provide ultimately come from council.
Councilor Mayor? Yeah. Councilor House?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure why, I'll be honest, with why this is in here. To answer that question, after we had the workshop together, we sat down as a board. This was an operating reserve, so there was apparently other libraries have a large operating reserve that if and when funding were to be cut or anything, they could keep the doors open and operate for a certain amount of time. The discussion with the board was, why do we need that? We already have an agreement with the town. It's a 2-year opting out. There's no reason to have any operating reserve. Apparently it's a practice of other libraries. So in fact, all of these titles, we talked about service enhancement. Service enhancement is probably going to be gone. Litigation account is going to be gone. This isn't yet revised, but we had this an in-depth conversation, and this is where in August we're going to get into finalizing this reserve policy. But I'm pretty confident that some of those lines are no longer going to be present in the policy. This is just if the library would have funding, we would potentially have 300,000 to X amount for operating to keep the doors open for a certain amount of time until we got all the ducks in a row for funding. But we're not, the board isn't looking at that anymore. Hopefully that answers your question.
Councilor House, Councilor Taylor?
I just want to understand the net effect of what we're doing. I think I do. So this is kind of old information, but the library budget for 2023 is rough for 2024. It's roughly going to be in the 630, 640 range, minus revenues, which puts them at a deficit of about 530, 540, 520, somewhere in there. So in effect, this would take 104 off that and make the net ask down to the low 400s.
Okay, through the chair, that's correct.
Unless something unusual happened to the expenses.
Councilor House?
So if I understand, then based on that recommendation, if I can just bring up. Sorry. So that would leave total surplus still of 222 in our reserves with 104. Is that correct? Or it would be 222 minus the 104.
Administration?
Thank you. Through the chair of the rest committee. My reading is that the current balance right now today of the reserve is on the second page of your RFP. It's 418,994. And we're suggesting underfunding the operating ask by 104,774, leaving a reserve balance at the end of the year, depending on the ins and outs, somewhere in the area of 314,220. I'm correct.
Councilor House?
So still having 314,000 in reserves, this one clear. if that's what we'd be talking about as a board, then that where we go with that. So even if we wanted to as a board, we might decide to do more than 104,000 potentially. Okay, thank you.
Committee. Anything further? You have a motion. There's nothing further. Action request. There we go. There it is. Councilor Taylor, is that the direction that you wanted to make?
Yes, sir.
Make a motion that committee provide consensus to request the town of Hinton Library Board utilize $104,774 from existing reserves as part of the 2024 budget request to the town of Hinton in recognition of past over budgeting for operations. Committee, if there's no further questions, please vote now. And that's carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Is there anything further with the town of Hinton Library level of service? What's the favor?
Yeah, I have another motion if I could, please.
Yep.
Could you put up the one about we seek consensus to modify contract, the amount of money we're putting into surplus? Yeah, yeah. So I think what this brings up to me is two things. And first is that, like I said before, that section 3 of appendix 6 in the contract that we signed is without any sort of guidance about how much money can go into the reserves. And I don't think we envisioned having this massive amount of money going into reserves. And I think one of the ways around that is to talk to the library about modifying that section so that within reasonable limits, money is put into reserves. And as you'll see the wording on it, seek consensus to modify the contract with the library such that in any given year, 30,000 or an agreed upon amount is put into reserves, operating or capital. So agreed upon amount means that if they have something specific that they want to buy, by all means, we're able to work with them to get that. But this helps to prevent what we saw just happening in the future, I think, and puts it, at least if there's an exceeding amount of money that has to go into reserves, we're going to get talking about first, because money does have to all come from taxpayers.
You wanted to make that motion?
Yes.
That's okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just before I go to committee, I have a question. So are you saying that you want a guaranteed $30,000 per year put into reserves, or is that supposed to be to a maximum of 30,000?
Yeah, that was the intent. That seek consensus to modify the contract with the library such that in any given year, only up to a maximum of 30,000 or an agreed upon amount. Yes, that's correct. There was sort of missing.
I'll go to committee, Councilor Haas.
Yeah, so with that motion, I guess I have some understanding, because realistically, we actually only budget for $16,000 a year to go into our reserves. This particular problem has occurred with the surplus of what we've taken on with staffing and things like that. So I'm looking to administration to understand, because I don't know the NGA and I don't know the Library Board Act, but I'm trying to understand, because the word, the consent or the word I'm getting is that anything that's surplus automatically goes into reserves from our budget. And that not So how does that work? Can we do what is proposed here? I guess is my question. Is that possible? Because what we've been doing as a board has been giving back $60,000 for the past 3 years. Now we're saying we were at consensus of 104. But I guess I'm just curious, financially, is this even possible to put an amount on there with a surplus?
Through the chairs and members of council. It's possible, depending on our contract, we can work out a relationship that works out well for us now. We do have the library act to comply with the maximum of $30,000. We can certainly do. That might, for the agreed upon amount gives us flexibility on that, but as you said, one of the big problems is the operations surplus. So I think that's likely what we'd be looking at doing, is that the surplus over and above a certain amount would be, reflected in the next year's budget and therefore just reduce our ask. The $30,000 or agreed upon amount, that would be reflected in the actual budget, the contributions to the reserves. Contributions to the reserves themselves. So whatever council agrees to, whatever the library board budgets to be contributed to reserves, council has to make that decision at budget time if that's an appropriate balance, whether that's 30,000 or at the agreed upon amount. And the surplus at the end of the year, if there is any, what we'd be looking at doing is that essentially giving it back or reflecting that onto next year's operational ask of the town. So we can certainly do that. We can't unilaterally make that decision. That's gonna have to be made with a discussion of the library board, but certainly willing to have those discussions.
Yeah, so if I can follow up with that, I can't support it this way because it doesn't, if we're gonna look at, as I'm reading it, it's only to reserves. If we were to look at specifically the surplus and what it, coming to an agreement that if and when the surplus is X amount of dollars or whatever, that goes towards the next year's budget, I'd be in agreement of this, but I mean, realistic, like I said, is typically we only budget 16,000 for reserves specifically from each budget. So I would be more inclined to have a motion with regards to surplus specifically and have that in agreement. That if there's an operational surplus, then that goes back to the town or whatever. And then that leaves then reserves to be asked at the budget time. So.
You, Councilor Ross, and then Councilor Taylor, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Reese, and Councilor Taylor.
I'm not sure that's written the best it could possibly be, but that's kind of my intent is, if we have a surplus in any given year that within limits, it would be, considered in the next year's, budget. It might not be written perfectly. What I'm thinking is that in the last 14 years, there'll be 4 years when reserves have jumped ballooned by more than $100,000 for one reason or another. So this is something that 1 in 3 years, it occurs 1 in every 3 years. And when I use the words with the library, I'm not saying we would do it unilaterally. I mean, we could do it with the library. Maybe try to get that wording modified in the contract, working with them and with their concurrence, and therefore put reasonable limits on surpluses. So I can either I can reword it, perhaps with your help.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor, Councilor Rivera.
I will support it because I support the intent of it. I mean, wherever that money comes from, it's taxpayer money that wasn't spent on things that was intended to use. So rather than jamming it into a savings account to spend on stuff that nobody has to ask for, it makes sense that the next year's request would be reduced by the amount of the overpayment for the previous year's, seems to me, rather than building that reserve up and away from any sort of public review.
Thank you, Councilor Rivera, Councilor Reese.
I'm good, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question is to, the administration. Is this direction sufficient enough to give the latitude to administration to look at the surplus and then bring something to a future committee of the whole meeting within the contract? And if not, what would you suggest to add for today? Administration?
Through the chair, you know, the intent of the motion is here, if we wanted to, you know, perhaps word it differently, I'd recommend how we can provide consensus to engage in discussions on future operational surplus use, and to bring those options back to a future meeting of council. That's a more vague, motion that would really provide more option to us, because, you know, there might be other mechanisms of control, and that will have to be, you know, worked out alongside our partner at the library, but, you know, a motion like that might really be sufficient as well, if we wanted to leave all options.
Yeah, follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This would be in addition to this motion, you know what I'm saying? Or in replacement of?
Through the chair, that would be, I think, a replacement. But through the chair, you know, even with this, you know, we can certainly look at this specifically. We can also bring back other options as well. Because there may, I think there probably will be some, but I think no matter which way we tackle it, if this motion is supported by committee, I think that the intent of it is clear, and we can certainly.
So if I may, with that being said, then I'll support this motion, and the administration will do that legwork to bring something forward to the committee in the future for us to finalize any, if there's any changes to anything. So thank you, I support this.
Yeah, Michael's, Councilor Haas, and Councilor Taylor.
Yeah. I mean, based on CEO Panasic's recommendation, I mean, I would prefer the changing of it, to be honest. I like the surplus part of it better, because that's what we're really focused on, and that's what has built it up. If we look at just what the reserves have built up, it's not as much as the surplus. So, like, with those recommendations, if the administration is feels comfortable with what the motion is to accomplish the goal, then I'll support this as well.
Thank you, Councilor Haas, Councilor Taylor.
I'm good either way. The idea is to get some sort of discussion on section 3 and try to put some reasonable bounds on it. I don't want to constrain what those discussions are right now. Maybe that's too constraining, but I think that we've got enough that the administration can work with. So to get your vote, I would change it, but I don't have to, so I won't.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor, committee, anything further? Nothing from committee then, if we could see the direction request, please. There is a direction request. The committee seek consensus to modify the contract with the library such that in any given year, only up to a maximum of $30,000 for the agreed upon amount to put into reserves, operating or capital. Committee, if there's no further questions, please vote no. And that is also very unanimous. Here, everyone. Committee, is there anything further, Councilor Haas?
Yeah, I just want to make just a general comment. I appreciate the conversation, administration bringing this forward, and I just want the administration and council also to know that as a library board, this is high priority to figure this out. Hence why we came up with the fact that we wanted a reserve policy to try to put some parameters in there, and there's definitely some conversations going back and forth, some agree, some don't, but we're gonna come to a conclusion of how we want to also assist in keeping these reserves in check as well. So I'm looking forward to our meeting in August and the recommendations from council to look that into the conversation. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Haas, Councilor Taylor.
That was only one half of what the problem I thought that we had to solve. The second one you'll see in the next motion. If we could put it up. Might modify the bit after this discussion to be a little more general. that council seek consensus to recommend to the library board that the operating capital reserves, be capped at an agreed upon, limit, instead of having a number. They'll be capped at, an agreed upon amount. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I cap it at 100,000, but, so. The idea there is that, we have a library that's adequately operated on reserves, less than 100,000 for quite a few years. And it's only been in recent years with COVID and the resulting salary savings that the amount has gone higher. And, at the meetings that I was at with the library board, they weren't specific on what they were going to spend at. By all means, if you have something specific that you want to spend the money on, sure, we can look at that, but just to have a high amount of money in reserves for no particular reason, it's not, to the taxpayers, benefit. The other thing I remember hearing from the library board was, okay, well, we need enough money to fund you for a long period of time because we've got employees, and if we don't get money, well, you know, they're unionized employees, it will eventually become something that we would have to take care of anyways. Much like the Parks Canada had to incorporate the hot springs into their operations when they can no longer operate the hot springs, same kind of thing. Having large operating reserves doesn't seem to be, to the extent necessary that we saw in the, numbers that we were talking about, before. But this will start the conversation with what the upper level of those operating reserves are. So how much money goes into it and how large they get to be. The two important conversations we need to have with the library board through administration, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Maybe we have a motion on the table. Any questions?
Yeah, I don't disagree with this. This is a conversation the board again is currently having as to what would be a maximum amount. We are currently, that's one of the reasons also we're having a meeting in August, talking about budget already, is our manager is working on a capital 5 to 10 year plan, for money to see and look at what kind of expenditures we want to make. But I'm not disagreeing with this, to start the conversation, because I think it's important that council also have some input on that, and then be able to take back those recommendations to the library board. But I rest assured, this is definitely a conversation that's happening in most of the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for administration is if this direction does move forward, this would have to be captured within the contract between the town of Hinton and the library board?
Through the chair. My impression of the motion and the way it's worded, I would tread lightly here just because I read this as we don't want it to be direction into the policies that they're responsible for. I think that the Library Act and the province of Alberta will look upon favorably of imposing what they have to put into their policies, specifically the reserve policy. I think we can keep there regardless, because each year we make a decision on how much we're going to fund to the reserves. And I think that it's just good governance and good accountability to ensure that when we are providing money into reserve and how much they ask for, I think it's been 16,000 past that, a plan comes along with it. And so we can agree to that on a yearly basis based on what they put forward for their capital plan, taking into account all of those, but our control is mainly on the amount of money provided. I don't think we want to be seen as trying to impose, council's will on the library board. The way it's written, we can certainly recommend that that's how we would prefer to see it in the future. But I don't know if we want to work it into a contract.
So those comments inconsistent with what we just did. I mean, what we just did is your reserves worked up to an extremely large amount of money. Now we're recommending that, and don't do that, we're gonna probably lower your allotment that we give you next year anyways. So why not be proactive and do something like this? I mean, sure, they can always tell us to go, you know, stand, I guess. And we can't really tell them to do this, but this is worded like a recommendation anyways. So ultimately, if you build it up to too large an amount, we're watching and we're gonna notice this and we're gonna do something about it. And that's what we've just done today. So I don't know why we can't have a recommend.
Through the chair to the rest of council. The difference that I see here is we want to come to an agreement on how we are willing to fund them in perpetuity. This is how, we are going to fund your operational expenses, which is what they request every year. So just ensuring that the expectations are clear ahead of time. This, when you're looking at how much they're allowed to have, I think in absence of looking at how much we're funding them each year, I think it's beyond the scope of what the municipality has to do with the library, just because, you know, we are not the only source of revenue that you come to a library. They could, you know, if they could operate completely autonomously, they could. They could do that with other grants or other supports. You know, they may be looking for other funding outside of the municipality. I mean, there's all sorts of different scenarios that, you know, a cap might affect their policies and something that would be outside of our role in our relationship with the library. So that was my reason for caution.
Mr. Ross? For the record, the library board members comes in.
They do different words.
We wouldn't do that either. But I guess my other question is because this is a conversation the board is having to look at what do we want in reserves. When and if we come up with a library reserves policy and no longer a draft form, does that have to be okayed by council in a meeting? Or is that just for the board? That's just the boards. Okay.
Through the chair, that's
Just the board. Okay. So I hear what the CEO Panasic is saying, and I guess hearing that, treading on it lightly. But I do rest assured that this is definitely something that we as a board are talking about. And this conversation alone, even if we don't go, this it will be discussed, the words in the discussion in the next meeting as well, to have some input from this conversation. So, but based on that, I'd like to then say I'm not going to be in support of this, just based on the fact that maybe we are being too descriptive. So.
Thank you, Councilor Haas, Councilor Navarre.
Just so I understand, so if they said, no, we think we need to have $1 million in reserves, and we'd have to go, okay, I guess we'll just keep funding our 16,000 a year, because that's what we agreed to. If you guys want to have $1 million, you can have $1 million. Like, that just doesn't even make any sense. That at some point you couldn't go, okay, that's just not passing the test of being reasonable. And therefore, we're going to adjust the amount we're going to give you this year. I mean, I understand that they've got an organization around, but if what we're talking about here is, well, you don't have any control over what the library does, it just doesn't, to me, make any sense. I mean, yes, but it just doesn't make any sense to not be able to adjust.
through the chair. No, I know what you're saying, and you know, my perspective on that is, you know, we make our decision on a yearly basis, and so if we believe that anything is getting out of whack, and you know, and the reserves are climbing to $1 million plus, and we don't think that's reasonable with no plan on how to spend it, you know, our control is essentially with the purse strings on a yearly basis, so we can make the decision at that point on how we fund them based on our knowledge of what's happening with the rest of it. My fear is that if we're is by making some kind of the recommendation as it's posed, that we are trying to dictate what they're going to be, what they are required to pass for their policy, which is the reserve policy that's currently in draft. And I don't think we want to be seen as trying to dictate what they pass in reserves. I think we can make a judgment call based on their capital plan and whether we want to fund it, because ultimately that's where our control is.
Follow up, no. I mean, so our policy would say we don't fund any annual contributions if a capital fund is over a certain amount. It would seem to me that that would be an easy enough policy for us to put in place. They can have $1 million in there, just like that.
Councilor Rich, see no one else if you would speak to it. I recognize the premise and I agree with the premise. My concern would though be in the scenario where maybe the library board wants to undertake a significant capital expenditure, $200,000 say. So in their annual requisition, they're requesting $50,000 a year. They're going to reserve over 4 years so that they have that money in capital reserve to do that expenditure. If this is part of their reserve policy, then they wouldn't need to do that. So I think maybe for me, taking a look at it annually and seeing how much is there and what the plan is for it moving forward, and then adjusting the annual contribution every year would maybe be a cleaner scenario, a cleaner way to do something like that. I'm not sure it's supported the way that it is. Councilor Taylor?
Yeah, I considered that exact scenario. That's why I put on the words capped at an agreed upon amount. So if you have something specific you want to buy that takes it over the cap, by all means, we'll talk about it. That was the intent of those words. So that mitigates your concern.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Any Michaels?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After listening to all of the comments, I won't die on this hill. I will support this one. I would encourage that council, if there's an appetite to use some of those funds, to look at increasing the $104,000 amount, or over the next 2 years, eat up a bit more of the reserves that was accumulated. And then the previous motion of 30,000, they want to build it over 100,000. And we're okay with them deciding 30,000 a year. I can see us not having anything to do with that part, essentially. And then we can take in consideration every year when we pass a budget. But if we're good with 30,000, if they want to go over a certain amount, then that's their prerogative in my opinion. So I like where this was going, but it seems way too complicated to support. So again, we passed a previous motion of 104. If we do nothing else, maybe that was a bigger issue. Hypothetically, if that amount was 208, now you take out what we deem to be some of the issues that have built up, you get this offset taxpayer money and get rid of this larger pot. So I think there's different ways to do it, or it might take a year or two. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Michaels. Any further? Councilor Taylor?
When money sits in a bank account and is being taken away from the taxpayer, it's money that could be circulating in the community amongst the business people, amongst the taxpayers, and it could be, generating economic activity, generating revenue to the town. That's a consequence of allowing large amounts of money to sit in town bank accounts and not be circulating throughout the town. So, always aware of that. Thank you.
Councilor Taylor? Committee? Okay, so nothing further from committee. Let's see the discussion of this. Motion the committee seek consensus to recommend to the library board that operating and capital reserves be capped at the agreed upon amount. Committee, if there's no further questions, please vote no. And that is carried 4-2 against Mayor Michaels and Councilor Foster in advance. Committee, is there anything further? Okay, seeing nothing further for the Hinton Library Level Service Workshop. We'll move on to 5.2, draft FCSS service level policy. Administration.
Thank you, Chair. I will turn this over to Ms. Judy and Bouchard.
Thank you through the chair for the rest of the committee. Community Services is proud to present a policy capturing council's current level of family and community support services and daycare services provided to Hinton and area. Just a correction in the RFP, there's a few references to an organizational chart or permanence and temporary staffing. That has been eliminated from the service level policy in the final draft report became part of the agenda. Apologies for that reference is being in the RFP. As mentioned, an approved level of service policy for FCSS will fulfill elements of the Community Services 2023 business plan, the tactical plan for 2023, and council's strategic plan. The policy describes, for the benefit of the general public, the legislative and regulatory framework within which FCSS and daycare is provided to Hinton area residents. It's particularly important because of the legislative framework that it actually does exist within and must respond to. Council should be aware that significant parts of the current service level are supported by grant funding. Approximately 53% of the cost of the service branch is cost recovered through user fees and through grant funding through the FCSS grant program, but also through other grants provided by the province primarily. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have, and Manager Bouchard is here also to answer any questions.
It's in favor.
I'm having trouble understanding the financial picture. So it's $1 million program. The amount jointly, the 80 and the 20% together is 444,000. So how much additional money does the town of Hinton put into it? So the amount that the province has decided to fund with our 20% is 444,000. We've got a program that's well over double that amount. How much does the province? How much do we fund over and above that 444?
Thank you through the chair to the rest of committee. It's a question of over contribution, I believe, is what you're asking. We don't have that number for you today. Again, I refer back to the functional area generating 53% of expenses in revenue, primarily grants and user fees. User fees would be coming from the daycare services provided, and the grants are FCSS grant is part of it, including the town's contribution, which is tax funded. And then the other grants that the staffing at FCSS seek out and turn into services for the community. So as far as the over contribution goes, it's not a particularly useful number we found as I was trying to calculate it, and I haven't made that calculation. So, but we can provide that to you if you're interested.
Not only am I interested, I don't know how this council can make a decision based on seeing basic financial information like that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councilor Taylor's question, isn't it roughly 510,000 minus 444, which is 64,000 or whatever, $66,000 is the additional increase on top of the 88 that we must do with the 20%. That was the math that I figured out there.
So I'll refer that question to Manager Bouchard.
Thank you, through the chair, to the rest of the council. So in simple terms, what the taxpayers pay is roughly just over 500,000. Is the dollar amount.
Oh, an extra
Yeah.
$56,000.
Yeah, it's about 14, you guys fund about 14% of the program.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's not hundreds of thousands, it's just $56,000. 56, 56. 50 or 60,000 tax
Yes,
over the 44.
yeah, but the total, if you want the total amount that the taxpayers pay for the program every year is just over 500,000.
Right, okay, that's. Thank you.
You, Councilor Taylor? Committee? Say recommend action committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, with, nothing else, then I'll, make the recommended action that council refer the draft FCSS level of service policy CS 7202 to a future regular council meeting as presented. That's all.
Yeah, Marcus, did you want to speak to this? Okay, committee, we have a, recommended action motion. Any comments or questions? Taylor?
Yeah. Maybe that's, maybe I could ask that later. I'm sorry.
Committee? So nothing further from committee then, if we can see the motion, please. The committee refers the draft FCSS level of service policy CS 7202 to a future regular council meeting as presented. Councilor Taylor?
Well, I'll ask this question anyways, although, we're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars extra that I was worried we were, so that's good news. What I wonder about when I look at the programs that we have is we have a range of programs that we're funding from, elder abuse and respite care, all the way through to, I forget what it's called, barbecue programs in rich neighborhoods, right? There's a range from, looking after the need, the neighborhood, block party kind of stuff. Has there been some look at these kind of programs to see if we could refocus some of these programs on the needy and Hinton, like funding my neighborhood for neighborhood block parties? And that's only one example. There are a couple of other ones. It's not really something, we don't need $5 an hour for money, but right, there might be other programs here as well that we could, look at that money and refocus it on the needy people in the community. I think that's something that maybe we want to look at when we look at this policy too. To get value for money for the taxpayer. Like, are all the programs delivering the value that we want? Like, are we getting the maximum punch on each one of these programs? So, there are a few examples that look a little strange for the taxpayer to fund in my humble opinion. One way to do it is for council to do a program by program review. But I don't want to do that. There are other ways to do that as well.
Councilor Taylor, administration, respond.
Yeah. Through the chair, to the rest of the committee. So, part of the provincial mandate is to do outcome measures. So every program that the FCSS delivers, we create a program logic model. And that program logic model makes sure that it covers the pillars under the regulation of the provincial act. So another thing that we do every year is like survey. So part of the program logic model, the creation of the program, and then every year a outcome summary is filled out, and the outcome summary captures the outcome of the program for that year. And so those outcome summaries is what we have to deliver to the province on all of our programs. So some programs we do drop because our outcomes show, like our community dinner, right? We found that it was just focusing on a certain population that was not a huge need. So then we made that shift and put our resources into respite care, sitting on the Hinton Abilities Network, and then supporting Hinton Employment Learning Place with the homelessness project. So yeah, we do shift. One thing that we don't do is duplicate service. So if there is agencies or nonprofits in the community we would rather support, and give staffing time, and to support the nonprofit rather than, take over a full program. Like Coats for Kids is another program that we just took over. The share shop, was running it for a bit, and Hinton Employment Management was running it for a little bit. And they couldn't manage the program anymore, so they conducted that, and asked if we would take it over, and that's largely what FCSS does too. If nonprofits don't have the capacity to, continue initiatives in the community that are still a need, or a gap in the community, we take them over and then create that capacity. And then if we see that there is a capacity in the nonprofit again, then we either partner, or hand it over again. So we're shifting like that all of the time.
My follow-up. You mentioned that you didn't, overlap with other, agencies as well. Under individual supports, you got one-on-one help to access government programs and services, Canada pension and old age security, but yet Service Canada does exactly that. All you need to do is phone them. So isn't that an overlap?
Due to the chair for the rest of the committee, so this was actually, that support was created because we've seen the gap in the community. That was, seen through COVID. Service Canada and Alberta Supports created just a toll-free number that individuals, had to call and then wait, get a booking, and do it all online. When you refer to, sort of supporting people, that are in need, many of the individuals in the community that need those supports don't have a cell phone, need that face-to-face support. So when Alberta Supports closed their doors for over a year, that's when FCSS supported that, and we built up that relationship and that clientele, and we've seen the most amount of homelessness clients and people in need than we have ever had before, because taking over that service in conjunction with Alberta Supports. Alberta Supports still does a little bit of it, but not in the same capacity that FCSS does.
Does that change now that it's over? Alberta support, but I agree with you, like during COVID, Service Canada, they're like a turtle, right? They operated into their shell for some reason. But now COVID's over, surely they will have the offices now. These guys, right?
Yeah. Thank you to the chair, to the rest of the committee. So if you coming in at the FCSS annual conference, there's actually a resolution coming forward, to hopefully get Alberta Supports to bring back their face-to-face service, because it's created a huge download on FCSS offices in the province. So yes, so when FCSS see that download, that's what we do. We come together and the resolution is created from that to help support. Then we can, if we give up and Alberta Supports and we see some space enough, then that's when we introduce another program based on the need in the community.
That's good to hear. I don't like provincial down. Thanks.
Councilor Taylor, Mr. Lawson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to build off that unfortunately COVID created a lot of programs that didn't go back to normal, because they found it was more fiscally advantageous, but community-wide, it's not. So there's a lot of things that stayed the same even though COVID is gone, and that's one of them. I just wanted to make a comment and Mr. Bouchard spoke to a lot of it, but I think one of the things that FCSS, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is also to be a community-based organization where it's not just for people in need, it's for the community. So I hear what Councilor Taylor is saying, however, it's a balance that we're helping those that may be more in need, but also creating programs for other sectors of our community that can still take advantage of some of these things, because there's nothing stopping somebody from having, in fact, those neighborhood barbecues are fantastic. It gets people connected to their neighborhoods no matter what neighborhood it's in. So am I speaking incorrectly that FCSS, when funded, is looking at not just specific sectors of your community, your program wide, but community wide, is that correct?
Through the Treasury of the committee, that is correct, so yeah, it, we focus on, like, I think. To say it in the simplest form is like community, family and individuals, right, and that support varies on whether there's many financially stable families in our community, but some of those families be highly support in parenting, abuse prevention. So all of that support, sometimes it's just not financial.
You, Councilor Haas, Councilor Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to tell you, the difference between picking up the phone, phoning someone, waiting on that, someone to answer the phone, as opposed to walking into a building, having a sit-down conversation to ask about CPE and old age, to ask about aids for daily living, to get an answer and then ask another question. I would never want to. So what is in that regard?
Councilor Reese. Any further before all motion question? Seeing nothing further from committee. We'll again, like call motion question, the committee refers to draft FCSS level of service policy. CS 7202 to a future regular council meeting as presented. If there's nothing further from committee, please vote no. In favor? Okay, and that's carried unanimously. Good. Okay, that brings us to 6.1, council reporting. Sorry, council, okay, we got six, so before we move on.
Thank you. Is there anything that the town, perhaps our mayor, can do to help with this provincial download responsibility on the one-on-one support? Like, should we be, writing letters to the minister of whoever it is? And saying that this is one that we wish they would go back to the in our town. Because we can help you too. We're here to help.
I think to share to the rest of the community, I think maybe the most important thing that we could push is when provincial decisions are being made, rural is entirely different than urban, and not just shooting out dollars based on an urban perspective. I think maybe thinking a little bit more in that regard with rural focus. I don't know if that's maybe suited the MLA. But
well, and don't have to answer tonight, but if you just keep that in mind, putting pressure on people to make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen without a little bit of pushback is just what's expected of us. Like we should be fighting for our citizens' rights under the provincial government in this regard and these kind of things. That's what we're here for. So if we can help you do that, I would urge you to bring matter to us and ask us for a letter of support to all of you, particularly what we can do with us. Other than just let you down or stuff that mandate creep and we end up, towns end up, rural Alberta ends up with more responsibility to make sure those people just that they're doing nothing. Thanks.
Thank you through the chair for this. Can you just to add to that, Ms. Bouchard's answer a little bit? Council's participation on the FCSS is a very key component of this because that is an advocacy group made up of elected officials and administration. So those issues that group brings forward are heard, and if council can participate in that, and then additionally anything else. Sometimes some of the policy decisions that the province makes take a little while to play out, and the inadvertent side effects of that are take a while to manifest. FCSS will be the person, so. We can feed information up and we can bring it forward, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe, is there anything further before we move on? Nothing further, we'll move on to council reporting. Start for rate, Councilor Haas.
Nothing to report, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Haas and Michaels,
Nothing to report, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Mayor, Councilor Race. Nothing to report. Councilor Baird,
Report, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Baird.
I'm excited to report that, the Hinton movies did quite well with the, Barbie movies this weekend. I trust all of you were there, so, that's good to see that, because that's a facility that we want to be utilized to the maximum. The other thing I kind of noticed is one of our valley businesses created a card that they put in, either of the, hotels in town. And Hinton Movies is doing that as well, so they're trying to advertise their services in motels. Just a thought to leave with you, why doesn't the town of Hinton think of doing something similar, right? Or doing something in a coordinated manner, so when people come to town and they're staying a night, we could have, QR code or something similar, so they're aware of each of the hotels, all the services, the swimming pool, the movie theater, the beaver boardwalk, the bike trails, whatever it is, and then the visitors get out and do more. This might be a very useful undertaking for the communications department to undertake. So businesses are taking it up one by one, so it seems to be gaining traction. Perhaps we could jump on the bandwagon.
Councilor Taylor, Councilor Race.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've spurred me on to say something good. We had visitors at our house for a week and they play a lot of disc golf. And they went to our disc golf here in town. Their disc golf course is rated about 18 for the world, it's not good. And my daughter said, our disc golf that we have here in town is as good as playing on that with Indians. So kudos to our disc golf people, it is awesome. There.
Councilor Race, Councilor Taylor, did you have anything further to report?
No, that was good.
Okay, and for myself, I've got nothing to report. So that brings us to 6.2, Chief Administrative Officer reporting status report.
Through the chair to the rest of the committee, I won't go through it one by one, but we have provided a report on the July operating highlights. And if there's any questions on the report, I'd be happy to answer them.
If you see the open message, Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, I have a few. So, we'll start with rapid housing grant. Housing project. So when we approved the rapid housing project, I don't know if you were here, but we were told that the project would be completed by February 28th, 2023. And that things had to be done in a rush. And presumably, therefore, we had to pay a premium to get a contractor that was going to do everything in a rush. Well, here we are 6 months later, and we're sitting with for over couple of weeks, with an incomplete project, and we're sitting with 5 units still bubble wrapped. Now that has two consequences to the citizens of this town. One, minor consequence, that's the foregone revenue, which is very much anyways. And two, that the social housing needs of this council aren't being fulfilled. There are five families in Hinton that could have had better housing. And people need better housing in 6 months. So why, when is this project going to be complete, and why is it dragging so long?
Administration, I'm not sure if you're prepared to speak to that today.
Through the chair, I don't have all of the details or what was promised at the time of application or approval of the project, but I'll pass it on to Mr. McLaughlin, who's joined us again halfway through, so I don't know if we can answer the former, but possibly the latter of the completion date.
Yeah, through the chair and the rest of the council. So we're working hard to try and get that project completed by September first is the new date that we're trying to have the units available for. The contractor's telling us they're coming to take the bubble wrap off and to do their final stuff, starting next week on 14th. That's when they're gonna be back to do the rest of that work. So there was, a few different delays, at first, there was delays with the fires getting the units here, but then as the fires resolved, they had a supply issue and turned out they were slow getting the units completed at the factory in Hinton where they're built. So that was essentially the delay in getting the remaining units.
Follow up. Do we have a contract that guaranteed delivery on certain days? The performance clauses?
The through the chair, the contract did have some dates in it, but not with any consequences or teeth to them. So it has been a pretty difficult project to manage because of the design build aspect to it. And so we've had, we're dealing with multiple contractors and multiple people because of that, and it is a very challenging project to finish. We will be bringing a RFP to council at some point, bringing the financials of the project to see it, what council wants to do for finishing off the landscaping. As the project right now is very tight with money.
Any other?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just the extension of the Maxwell Lake Bridge be commenced this week. What's the target completion date?
Through the chair, I believe it was August 31st, right?
That's correct, yeah.
That's it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Michaels. Committee, any other comments or questions? Councilor Taylor?
Under the aquatic section, that big toy that we had, I forget what it's called, widget, a Weebit?
Ribbit.
How many times is that being used? We were told it was gonna get used in July. Is that being used in July?
So, thank you through the chair of the rest of the committee. So that, the inflatable has been tested by staff. And so some adjustments have to be made to the anchoring we learned this morning. And so that will be done immediately. And so that's like an operating procedure for staff. And then the scheduling will start with it.
So it hasn't been used yet.
It has not been used by the public yet. That's correct.
A bit disappointing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Taylor. Committee, any other comments or questions on the CEO's report? Councilor Taylor?
Yeah, under public works and street sweeping, I was wondering about the sidewalk sweeping. Like, I previously had people talk about, the dirt and sand on the sidewalks. I've seen it myself. Do our staff like regularly roll the sidewalks and see if they need to be swept, particularly under the bridge? I don't know if it's still a problem, but it was a problem a while ago. So they say they do it as it's needed. Or do they check, make sure it's needed? Because it had been needed at a certain point in the summer under that bridge. It's just unsafe to ride your bike with some distress with the amount of sand and gravel that have been allowed to accumulate. So is that being done, or what's the plan to make sure that our some of our our big sidewalks that people ride bikers need to ride bikes on?
Administration?
Chair, I will pass this to Mr. McLaughlin.
To committee. So our sidewalk inspections are done at least once, if not twice a year. Typically, they're looking for, trip hazards and the sidewalks that rise highest in priority to get replaced. that's been done. We now have a concrete, person out there working, patching those. So it would be at that time that we would also look for that type of thing. Now that you raise a specific area, I'll make sure that that area gets looked at. But typically sidewalk sweeping is, done on a complaint basis, or if the crews observe, it's needed. We don't have, equipment to go out there and do it routinely like we do the streets.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last one I had was regarding the recycling depot hours and dates that have recently changed. I don't recall, but any recollection of when that was brought to council to change the cancellation of Sunday service for it? I've fielded a few questions regarding that. I don't have those particulars. Any idea when that was changed?
Through the chair to the rest of the committee, because I believe you were absent that day, but that was on the July 18th meeting, I believe. So, but you were absent that day. So.
Thank you.
Councilor Reese.
Thank you, sir. Quick question. When is the traffic dialogue? June.
Through the chair, I'll pass that to Mr. Overton, through the chair to all. That the date for completion was changed on 16th, so you can anticipate seeing it very soon. At the weekend, or for the community.
Thank you.
Anyone else in favor?
Thanks. The recycle legal contract was updated. So, we've signed that contract. So I can see the need to modify the contract if that council's desire, depending on what we do with the take it or leave it program. Maybe incorporate that as part of the contract as one of the options. Even though we've signed the contract, does that flexibility with that contract still exist?
Through the chair of the committee, certainly does. However we decide to manage the take it or leave it, if we do it all in perpetuity, we could certainly include that to the existing recycling center contract, or we can look at other possible options. That option is available to us.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Taylor?
The Greg Avenue project, if I could please. That project was completed successfully and turned out positively. Well, wasn't regarded as successful and positive for the businesses, and the reason why it wasn't regarded was because it went on into July. And that was seen as a problem with a number of the businesses there, and that was something that was deliberately foreseen and mentioned repeatedly to administration. And I've been told that by a contractor that they could have started earlier. So why was there a need to carry this contract on in July when that was foreseen as a major problem? And it did in turn cause a problem for a couple of the businesses. Why didn't we have to go deep into July? That's when these guys get their money.
Yes,
I think through the chair, I wasn't part of setting the original dates, but the contractor barely, but did hit the 21st of July deadline for getting the project complete. So from that perspective, we did hit our dates just barely, but we did hit them. I won't deny that we did have some impacts on the businesses, and when those were brought to our attention, we felt we acted quickly on them. Shouldn't have happened, but those things do happen in projects. So in terms of that, I mean, typically we don't want to start construction till after frost is up. And so when you're setting these contracts and you're tendering, you want to make sure that you're putting a timeline in place that when the frost is out, they'll start. Had they approached us and wanted to start early and frost was out, we probably would have allowed it, but that's, talking about stuff after the fact and after it's happened.
Any? Okay, since you no further comments or questions, I'll see you on status report. Move on, Councilor Haas, move to go in closed session. Thank you, Councilor Haas. The motion to go in closed session, see the motion, please. There's motion that committee move into closed session. Also, if there's no comments or questions, please vote no. Grace? Did you vote? What's going on? Are you in favor, Councilor Reese? Okay, that's carried unanimously. We will go into closed session with 5-minute break. We'll reconvene at 5:30.